Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so the SAT right now, as it is a standardized exam that tests problem-solving skills with English and math concepts. It used to have an essay. They've gotten rid of the essay. It's still optional in some cases, but the new digital SAT will not have an essay in any shape or form. Um, and what I say, the reason I say it's a test of problems, a test problem solving skills is because if it were just an English and math test, then every kid taking calculus would be scoring 750 or above, and every kid who's an AP or an honors English class would be, doing great on these tests. But it really tests problem solving skills, and it's designed to trick kids, um, and it's much more so designed to trick kids than say the ACT. Now the digital SAT is a little bit different in that regard, and I'll talk about that as we go through. Right now, the test is in two main parts. 1,600 points. You got a math section and an English section that are 800 points each. That is going to remain the same. Okay. I'm going to skip through this part real quick because I have this in I illustrate the differences as we go through later on. So, why is the SAT still important? And I say still because the vast majority of colleges right now are test optional, meaning they don't require an SAT or ACT score to get in. However, that being the case, a lot of schools have admitted that it's been very, very difficult to try to take a holistic approach and in evaluating students, and that without the SAT, a lot of them have sort of resorted to factors that may, in some cases, not be that fair to students. One of the things about the SAT is that it is um, it's a number, and because it is a number, that means that if you score that high score, they can't take that away from you. Whereas if you're coming from a certain school or a certain school district or whatever, and colleges can look and say, well, we've had kids from those schools in the past, and we know that they do very well, or we know that on average they don't do that great. Um, but if you've got a number to say, hey, you know what, I'm different than these other kids, and let me show you how I stand out. Okay, because grades are one thing, and that's the problem with grades, is that an A in one school and an A in one class from one teacher could be different than an A from another teacher in the same school. So, but the SAT and these standardized tests kind of cut through that, and but the thing about it is there's a way to game the system, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Um, but it's the SAT is still important for scholarships. It's still important to get into certain colleges. There are certain colleges, public colleges in Georgia and Florida, particularly, and then several private schools that are still that are newly requiring the SAT or ACT. And there's going to be it looks like there's going to be waves of schools that are going to begin to require them again. Um, and even though some colleges don't require the SAT or claim not to consider scores, those scores will help. Okay. Top colleges use it as a kind of sliding entrance requirement, meaning if your SAT is up here, then your GPA doesn't have to be quite that high. However, for the top colleges, these are just the minimum requirements. They look at something a lot more than just GPA and SAT. Um, and then colleges use it to distinguish between students with comparable classes and similar grades, as I just talked about. So it still is a pretty important factor here. Now let's start comparing here. On the right, you'll see the new SAT, the digital SAT, and the paper SAT will be on the left. Students have already been allowed to take in fact, have been required to take the digital SAT if they are in another country. So for this year, the international SAT has been a digital one and only a digital one. Um, the digital SAT for us in the United States starts with the March SAT. That'll be the first SAT of 2024. So as far as the paper SATs go, you've got one coming up this Saturday. You've got another one the first Saturday in October, the first Saturday in November, the first Saturday in December, and that's it. That's it for the paper SAT, no more. So there is no choice between the paper SAT and the digital SAT, because they won't be occurring at the same time for students. Now, the only choice that is there is for students who are trying to decide right now, do I take the SAT now or do I wait till the spring to take it? And if you are a senior and you're applying to the vast majority of colleges, you don't really have much of a choice. You're going to need to take the paper SAT in the fall if you haven't already taken it. However, there are a lot of colleges that have the rolling admissions, and so taking the March at the latest, I would say the March SAT would be the latest one that you could probably take and still use for most college admissions. In fact, for most college admissions, December would be the latest, but the March one can still, some colleges will still accept that. And if you're applying to a community college that does require some testing, then I think you could probably take it as late as May, possibly. So, okay, the test length has gotten a lot shorter. So the paper test was 3 hours and 15, or is 3 hours and 15 minutes, 195 minutes total, including breaks. The digital SAT is only 2 hours and 14 minutes, so a full hour and a minute less than the other SAT. And that doesn't include the experimental section on the paper SAT that they add afterwards. So, and that doesn't count toward your score at all. But as you can see, that the digital SAT is a lot shorter. Let's break it down. So, reading and writing, we've got the 100 minutes right now for the English section of the test, and it's really broken up into two separate tests. The reading section is 400 points out of that 800 points. The writing and language section is 400 points out of that 800 points. In the reading section, you have 5 long passages with 52 questions in 65 minutes. In the writing section, you have 4 passages with 44 questions each, 11 per passage, and it's only a 35-minute section. Now, the new SAT is will be a little over an hour, and it's a single test. Reading and writing will be combined into one test. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but there's some pretty huge differences here. One is that you've got 54 questions instead of 96, and you've got more time per question to answer these. Okay, that's going to be a big difference. And as opposed to the current test where you've got long passages, with the new SAT, it's one question per passage, and each passage is only 75 to 125 words long. It's basically a small paragraph, or it may be a graph that you're looking at, or a table, or something like that. So very different approach to teaching it, to teaching students how to approach it. In a sense, I would say that this is a lot easier because you're not having to search and read a whole lot of material to find the answer sometimes. Some of the questions right now involve, in the reading section, for instance, involve where did you find that answer to the question, and that part in and of itself can be very difficult. Whereas that's gone, and so some of the I would say some of the hardest questions that are on the SAT right now are gone from the new SAT. Some of the others would be main point questions, which when you're looking at the main point of an entire passage versus the main point of a small paragraph, it's a lot. It can be much more difficult. When you're looking at the technique used, it can be or the tone or shift in tone or that sort of thing. That can be much more difficult. So the general questions are not going to be as many, and they're not going to be as difficult on the new SAT. I would say, well, from what I've seen already so far, because the practice SATs are out there, so they are out there for you to to view. Um, and the passages, like I said, may contain some informational graphics. Okay, and by the way, if you have any questions about what I'm going over as we're going over, feel free to hop in and jump in at any time. Okay, the math. There's some major differences in the math too. The paper math is 80 minutes long, 10 minutes longer than the news section. But whereas now you have two sections of math, with the new SAT, it'll simply be one test. And you have a calculator section now and a non-calculator section. With the new SAT, you'll be able to use your calculator on the entire test. Okay. Right now, you've got 15 multiple choice questions in one section and 5 what they call grid in or student produced responses. In the other section, it's 30 and 8. So a total of 35 multiple choice questions and 13 student produced questions. With the new SAT, instead of 35, it's 33 multiple choice questions, and instead of 13 student produced questions, it's 11 questions. So not a lot shorter. Okay, there's not a tremendous number of fewer questions, but there's a little bit more time, just a little bit more time per question to answer these. And as opposed to um, the hold on a second, somebody's trying to get in. See if I can. May not be able to admit them. Let's see. Oops. Let's go back to that. Shucks, I can't let them in. Okay, well, too bad. They were late. You guys made it on time, so we'll keep going. As opposed to the current test where all the grid in questions or student produced responses are all at the end, they're going to be mixed in on this new SAT. Now, let's break this down even more. Okay, so here we see a much more kind of thorough breakdown of the sections and how this works. Let me do something real quick here, and I'm going to try to make this a little clearer so you guys can see it just a little bit better here. But hopefully this may make it a little bit clear. Okay, can you guys see my cursor on here?
Yes.
Okay, good. So as you see, one big difference, and on this particular graphic I'm showing you, the new SAT now is on the left side, and the old SAT is on the right side. And this is brought to us by Innovative Testing. Just wanted to give them credit for that. But one big difference in the new SAT is that what you have here is two modules for the reading and writing. Now, I said it was one test. It is considered to be one test as opposed to two different separate tests, one for reading, one for writing. It's one test. But what you have is a module of 27 questions. The students will complete the 27 questions, and based on their answers, based on how many that got correct, they will then move on to one of two other modules, which one will be easier, one will be more difficult. Okay, they'll have the same amount of time to complete it, but there'll be a different set of questions. Now you're asking, well, does that mean that you can't score as high if you get the easier one? That is correct. Your score is capped. I don't know exactly what that cap is, but so if you don't do well on the first 27 questions, which are easier in general than the next 27, you'll end up with a lower score by, you'll probably end up with a lower score. You'll certainly be capped at the score. And the same thing is true with the math section. The math is 22 and 22 questions. So everyone gets the first module, and then certain people get the next module. And with both of these sections, the reading, writing, and the math, the level of difficulty of the question tends to go up throughout the section. So that means that you'll see the reading questions. It's not like question number 2 is definitely harder than question number 1, but there's just a general trend, general tendency of the questions to get more difficult. Okay, so that is a major shift, major shift. And of course, all this is going to be done on a computer, and students can bring their own computer, and they'll have to download an app to that computer about 5 or more days before the actual test itself, so that they can take it. If they don't have their own computer, then the College Board will provide one for them, or the school will provide one for them. Okay, so that's not an issue. But all of this is AI generated. So basically, the test, even though it's not going to give you what your score is immediately, they've already scored the first module as soon as you take it, and they have to in order to produce the second module that you'll be taking. Okay, so the scoring though remains the same: 800 points for the math, 800 points for the English. That does not change. All right. So any questions so far? Okay, now let's take a look at, I'm going to put this back how I had it, and I think we'll be able to see the rest pretty easily. Okay, let's see. Okay. Okay. And now, can everyone see the slide that says changes in reading and writing?
Yes.
Okay, good. So some major changes in the reading and writing. The questions will start easy and they'll get harder as they go along. That's not exactly the case now. It's more like there's the first section, the first passage might be the easiest passage, but it tends to get harder, but it's not perfectly set out that way. Sometimes the third passage could be the hardest passage for some kids. So, but here it's going to be basically every passage is a question. So starts easy, gets harder. The first half of each module will be all reading questions. The second half will be writing. So it starts over in terms of level of difficulty when you get to the writing questions. Okay. Then for the reading, instead of the 4, I mentioned this before, instead of 4 to 5, 500 or 750 word passages with 10 or 11 questions each. Each question has a 25, I said 75, sorry, it's 25, it's 25 to 150 word passage. So some of these passages are only going to be like a sentence or two. Um, for writing questions, the no change answer is gone now. That was supposed to be on a separate line. I apologize for that. But so before you were given questions that presented a type of answer choice already in the passage, and you were either supposed to change it or leave it alone. That option is now gone. You have four options to do something or change the passage. The graphics, such as tables and graphs, are going to be simplified. And the reason why is because they need to appear easily on a tablet or a laptop. And so they're simplifying the graphics, meaning that they're going to be less confusing and easier to interpret and easier to read. For the writing section, there will no longer be any questions about commonly confused words or idiomatic expressions. Um, I would argue that this was the type of question that separated the top readers from the almost top readers. So those questions are gone now. So I'd say in a sense that that part of the SAT is easier now. There are no questions on moving a sentence from one place to another within a paragraph. No more questions about combining sentences. No more questions about whether a sentence should be deleted or kept. And no more questions about whether a sentence should be added to a passage. All of those are the types of questions that my students struggle with the most, and they're going to be gone. Okay, so another little thing that's making it easy. So now there's another type of question that students actually struggle with a lot too, and those are transition questions. And these are questions that have mainly about conjunctive adverbs. There's actually going to be more questions like these on the new SAT. So that's, in that sense, it may get a little bit harder for some students. Okay. Next, we look at some changes in the math. The calculator can be used now for the entire test, and you can either use your own that's approved, or you can use the one that's built in to the program itself, and it's called Desmus. It's an excellent calculator, and you don't have to, you know, you can just use that one. The graphs and tables for the math will also be simplified so that they display well. There's no more multiple question prompts. In other words, with the calculator section currently, you might have a prompt or formula or a word problem that applies to 2 or 3 questions. That's gone now. So it's going to be every question is in and of itself complete. Multiple choice and written answers are mixed together. Okay, so I think I mentioned that before. There's not going to be any grid ins. There's still going to be student responses, but students are not going to grid them in. They're just going to write them in. So that's going to be a little bit different. There are a slightly, not much, but a slightly fewer percentage of multiple choice questions. Probably not enough to make a difference in most people's score. And then there are no questions on imaginary numbers and complex numbers. Okay. And there seems to be, and at least the tests I've seen, a slightly higher percentage of geometry questions than there were previously. So that's a difference as well. I think there's going to be about the same number of questions, but because there's fewer questions in math, that means that you've got a slightly higher percentage. Okay. Now, as far as practicing the test, how do we prepare for this? Well, the College Board has already put out some practice tests. There are 4 practice tests that they have that are available through the College Board website itself, and the you can find these full length practice tests on what they call a blue book. And the blue book is something that it's an app that needs to be installed, and it's the same app that is used for taking the actual test itself. So if you're wanting to practice this, then you need to download the blue book. Khan Academy, which is paired with the College Board, also offers now official digital SAT practice. Okay, and it's free. There's some caveats, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. And then you can get assistive technology if you need to for the SAT as well. And I pulled this little page off of the College Board website. So if you go to their website, you'll see exactly what you're seeing right here on their website. Okay. Now, let me talk about using College Board and Khan Academy. And this applies both for the digital SAT and for the paper SAT. The everything by the way, there's a blue book, what they call it, this is separate from the blue book app that's there, but they call the blue book an actual physical thick book put out by the College Board every couple of years that has paper SATs, and it's only good for I wouldn't say it's only good for practicing paper SAT, but it's what it's designed for. Everything that's in that book can be found online for free. So if you don't want to spend that $30 for the book, you can just use Khan Academy. But then if you want to actually practice the paper techniques and approaches and all that, then you have to pay to print that stuff off. So it's you could probably find these books right now very, very, very cheap if you're planning on taking the SAT this calendar year, 2023, not 2023-24, but this calendar year. If you're still planning on taking that SAT, then you can probably get that College Board Blue Book, the physical one, for pretty cheap right now, online. The only questions you should practice, I always say, are the ones from either the College Board or Khan Academy. Those are authentic questions. I just finished teaching an SAT class that was for I do my own prep, but I also was helping out a friend of mine, and he used a Barron's guide. And some of those questions there, I just they're not close enough to SAT questions that I would say they're good questions. You need to stick with the College Board stuff and the stuff on Khan Academy if you're going to practice for the actual SAT. Princeton Review book, some of the math comes very, very, very close. There's problems, I think, with the reading in that book. Some of the writing questions are pretty good. College Board and Khan Academy provide adequate but not great explanations for every SAT concept. Okay. And what I mean by that is that they are going to explain the longest way possible to answer, to get a skill or to answer a question, because the College Board does not want everybody scoring very high on their test, because it cheapens the test if they do that. And because Khan Academy has been paired up with the College Board and receives money from them for the last several years, Khan Academy also does not want everybody to do well, even though that seems to be their mission. So what they will do is they will explain the concepts, and they'll explain how to do the certain questions and how to get them correctly, how to get them right, answer them correctly. But it's a long way around. So if you're trying for a really high score, they're not giving you the shortcuts. They're not giving you the tricks. They're not giving you the tips. They're not giving you the strategies. For that, you need to go somewhere else. Okay, and they're like I said, that's they're not in the business for that. College Board and Khan Academy should not be used for strategies. They're just not. You're just not going to find good strategies on there. Another thing too is that certain concepts, for instance, in math, are repeated over and over again, and then certain concepts are not. So, for instance, the formula y equals mx plus b appears on a recent SAT 9 times. Okay, you'd never know that from Khan Academy or College Board. You'd never know that that one formula could be used 9 times on the same test because they treat the types of questions that are frequently seen the same way they treat the types of questions and concepts that only appear 1 out of every 3 or 4 tests. Okay, that's very unfortunate for somebody who's trying to use Khan Academy or the College Board materials to prep for a high score. Same thing is true with the writing section where you're looking at grammar questions and things like that. It's a little better. It's a little better, but they don't really tell you what is going to be on there most frequently. So that's a little bit of a problem. Um, okay, and the Khan Academy and College Board should not be used to understand the wrong answers. Sometimes their explanations of why an answer is wrong comes down to something like it's wrong because it's not right. I kid you not. Some of the questions are about that. Some of the explanations are about that bad. But again, for practice problems and practice tests, Khan Academy and the College Board are the place to go. For learning how to prep for the actual test itself, it's not the best place to go. Okay, so where should you go? Well, that's where, kind of where I come in. Now, before I talk about myself a little bit and what I do want to talk about the scoring of the SAT a little bit. Some questions that people have, well, can I still super score? So if you know what super scoring is, that means you take your best math score and you take your best English score and you put them together. So even if you took them on different tests, you take one score and you put it together and you present it to the colleges. That used to be something that colleges didn't not too many colleges accepted. Now just about every college accepts it. There are some exceptions. There are some certain colleges that won't accept super scores, but the vast majority of colleges, including Harvard and many of the other Ivy Leagues and top 25 schools, they accept super scores. Okay, and they'll do the same thing with the digital and paper SAT. So if your highest math score was on the paper and your highest English score was on the digital, then you can super score those together and use those. Okay. Another thing that's really interesting and really groovy about the scoring is that you should be getting your scores back in under a week. Whereas before with the paper SAT, it takes at least 2 or 3 weeks and sometimes longer to get your scores back. So with the with the digital SAT, your SAT score should come back within a week. So that's pretty exciting. That's pretty cool. Okay. Um, let's see. Let me look at my notes for just a second, see if there's anything else that. Oh, I did want to mention. Did want to mention this that there's a concern about what happens if I'm taking the SAT and the power goes out, or if I have a problem with my internet goes down, or my computer shuts off for whatever reason. Um, they've got some incredible technology with this stuff now. I'm very impressed. Although I have to see how it plays out. This is what they're claiming, so I haven't heard myself what actually happens. But the claim is that let's say that I'm in the middle of the test and my computer messes up. Um, the technology will recognize that that's what's happening. And even if your computer shuts down or the battery runs out and you plug it back up, as soon as you pump it back up, puts you back where you started off and doesn't count that time against you. So pretty cool, pretty cool. Um, and then the other thing that I wanted to talk about is who should take which test. Okay, so I've kind of hinted that the new SAT is seems to be a little easier than the old one, and that's what it appears to be. That's what I've heard. I work with some international students who have taken the new SAT. They don't have a comparison, a basis of comparison, because they haven't taken the old SAT, but they seem to have done um, pretty well, pretty well on it, and they didn't. There were no complaints about it. So from that aspect, it seems to be going well. And the thing that I would caution people about is to think that easier means you're going to get a higher score. I don't know that that's going to be the case yet. The College Board really, the College Board has not admitted that the new SAT is easier. Okay, and of course the SAT is curved. So, and each SAT is curved separately. So I can tell you that I take the SAT every couple of years. The last time I took the SAT, I had well, one time that I took the SAT, I missed four questions on the math section, and I got a score of 740. On another test, students missed four questions and got a 780. So depending on which test you're taking, the score can be drastically different. Okay, can be very, 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 drastically different. Um, so that's something to understand, that because it's curved, if everyone finds the test easier and everyone does better, that means it probably will be a little harder to get a higher score on this new test. So I wouldn't count on taking this new test and it's suddenly being easier and your score is going to be higher. But I think it's going to be easier in terms of understanding all the questions more, getting a clear understanding of what you're supposed to do with every question, because that's one area that's a big area of complaint about the SAT now, that some of the questions are unclear, and that's intentional. That's intentional, that some of the questions are long, um, they seem very convoluted, and they're difficult to navigate sometimes. So um, but I would say that if you are a current senior, you should take the paper SAT. If you are a current junior, and you've been studying for the paper SAT, it's not going to hurt to take it. Um, and it's not going to hurt to go ahead and get that score, because if one of the scores ends up being a high score, then you can super score it with the other one. If you end up doing better than you do on the new one, then that's fine. But there is a learning curve, and there is going to be a dramatic switch in how you do certain things, especially with the English section. I would say that if you've been preparing with the math, that preparation pretty much will continue on for the new SAT. But for the English, it's going to be, especially with the reading section, um, to some extent the writing as well, but especially with the reading, it's going to be very, very different.